Snyder's family with the 16 kids that were found in that 12 by 12 room.
What is the update?
Couple updates. The first one is there was a preliminary hearing a few days ago, and it was waived by all defendants. So now it goes to a grand jury without the preliminary hearing.
Interesting. Why would they do that?
Well, I mean, sometimes there's really no point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Also, Brian Enton has entered the chat, and he is now covering this. Do you want to see his coverage?
Yes, I do.
I want to share a couple things first.
Okay.
The grandpa was released. So the one of the 4 adults living in the home, the grandpa, who looks like he had a stroke or something like that, he's been released. And it was really interesting. The reason that they gave for releasing him was he had a medical episode during transport to the jail.
Okay.
And whatever medical needs he has, they can't do there. They have to do it at a bigger hospital and like a nearby city, probably given where it is, I would guess Columbus.
Okay.
But if he is in their custody, they're on the hook for his medical treatment.
Yeah, that's true.
So they released him on no bond. So they said it would be expensive. It would probably bankrupt them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a sad state of our healthcare industry, but
it's a really small community. So, and he's not in the states because it's local authorities that have him. So it's the county.
Yeah. The county would have to spend all the money.
Right. Exactly. The state is helping the county with resources, especially for these kids. There are pics circulating that say that they're inside their house, that aren't inside their house. They're actually inside another, like a hoarder house that was nearby.
Okay.
But everybody's saying like, oh, first look in their house, and it's totally not their house.
Clickbait.
There was an interview with Elizabeth's attorney that I want to play for you. And it's really interesting that a lot of the stuff that he's saying that are coming from Elizabeth make it sound like they really exaggerated the conditions that these kids lived in to a point. So I want to play that so we can pause and like talk about it a little bit.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Oh, hold on.
Siders, one of the 4 suspects charged with 16 counts of child endangering. And the woman attorneys believe is the mother of all 16 of those children removed from the Hamden house last week. 10 TV first told you about this story last Tuesday. And at the time, Ohio Attorney General Andy Wilson described the situation as, quote, pure evil.
The next day, authorities said this about the conditions inside that house.
Most of our livestock was kept in better conditions than the children.
Ooh.
But in the past hour, Elizabeth Siders' attorney says there is much more to this story. 10 TV's Carla Rogner spoke to him and joins us now in studio with what we're learning about this, Carla.
Yeah, Tommy Stolley is the attorney appointed to Elizabeth Siders. I talked to him after he visited her in jail this afternoon. He said today she shared more information about her children and told him they were all born in hospitals. He says that he takes issue with comments authorities made calling those conditions inside the home pure evil and wanted to dispel some of the rumors. Here's some of our conversation.
There's a lot of people circulating incest, right?
Yeah.
But and some of them might not be hers. They might be some of the older children.
Right.
But if she had them all in hospitals, it's easy to tell if she gave birth to them or not, right?
Yeah, should be records.
Right, there'll be records that she's the one who had the baby.
Is it your understanding that the kids were forced to stay inside?
I don't think we've seen any evidence to prove that. There's been no evidence to suggest that there were any restraints in the home, that the children were locked or forced to remain in the 12 by 12 room. I think this is one of the things that's been really sensationalized on the internet.
Is it your understanding that she wanted to be pregnant this many times and give birth to this many children?
So what she's told me repeatedly is that she and Gary wanted a big family. I don't know if they wanted a family that was this big, but she's repeatedly said to me that she wanted a big family. She said that kids are a gift from God,
Has she talked to you about how the kids were treated at all, how they fed them, or what the dynamic was like inside of the home?
Absolutely. So, quite honestly, when I go into the jail, I've been there 3 times. Every time I go there, we end up talking about the kids for a significant portion of our visit. What she tells me is that the kids had phones. Some of them had social media, the older kids. I don't know how active they were on that.
So if they had social media, the older kids, how can they not spell their own names?
Yeah, something doesn't add up. It doesn't. What this guy's saying versus what everybody else was saying doesn't add up. So either it was grossly exaggerated early on and people were just making up stuff, or this guy's a liar.
Interesting. I don't think he's a liar. He's an attorney, but she would be the liar.
Correct. Either she's a liar.
Social media, but she tells me that they had little inside jokes. And I think the big thing with that is it doesn't jive with the way that this case has been characterized in the public. Because when you use language like feral kids, you're imagining people that have been isolated away from human contact. People who have never interacted with any sort of social media, with the internet, with humans outside of their own home, or even humans in general, who are completely lack the ability to use language. There's nothing to suggest that is the case here.
So the kids can communicate.
That's my understanding, yes.
Now, the attorney told me that Elizabeth has been receiving care packages from people while she's been in jail. He has filed a motion requesting Elizabeth be released on a recognizance bond. Right now, she remains in jail alongside her husband, Gary Jr., and Christina Siders. Yolanda?
All right, thank you.
Probably for the best right now.
What, does she stay locked up?
Yeah. Till they figure out what's going on.
So now that you've seen that, I can play the Brian Ensign, because he makes it sound like, the description of the children is feral and never been to school and not knowing how to spell their names and not being able to speak. That's his impression of this.
That's what I'm saying. That's what everyone's been saying.
Yeah, everybody. But could that be exaggerated? Because it's bad enough on its own.
It is. Yeah.
This is interesting because he compares it a lot to those Turpin kids that were found in California.
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the show. Really, really appreciate you guys. Appreciate everybody for checking out my content and everybody who's subscribed. You guys know how it is. Like, a lot of these stories I cover, a lot of these cases are super sad, but some of them are just sort of like beyond. And this Ohio case with the 16 abused children, allegedly at the hands of their parents and grandparents, living in the 12 by 12 room, really on the brink of death, a house of horror, as many are calling it, is just awful. And I have a really unique perspective on the case in this episode. You guys might remember, probably do the Turpin case in California, similar case, kids abused by their parents, locked in the house, chained up, didn't even really know how to speak.
I think Brian got a haircut. It's looking a little bit shorter.
Looks nice.
Yeah, his hair always looks great.
Yeah.
Speak or use language. Well, the prosecutor in that case is going to join me in this episode to talk about why parents do this and how the victims can recover. And she understands this really unlike anyone else, because she was close to the Turpins. She was the prosecutor. She understands the parents, the evil. And I'm just really, really interested in her perspective on all of it. So I'm going to get into it and the latest on the case in Ohio. The parents were just in court again. I've got all the details coming up in this episode of Brian Ensign Investigates. So it's got to be one of the worst cases any of us have seen in a long time when it comes to children. 16 children rescued from an Ohio home. The details are I was just saying, they're beyond. The kids kept isolated in a 12 by 12 room, isolated from the world, and living in literal squalor. Investigators describe the children as almost feral, ranging in age from 18 months to 18 years old. They're 18, 16, 15, 14, 13, 11, 10, 8, 6, 5. There were 4-year-old twins, there were 2-year-old twins, and there were 1.5-year-old twins. Think about that.
Whoa.
In that little house, in that little room.
3 sets of twins?
Parents have now been arrested. 73-year-old Gary Siders.
Yeah, so women, the older they get, the higher their chances are of having twins. So you're more likely to have a set of twins when you're over 30 than you are when you're under 30.
That still sounds crazy. That was the last.
I looked it up today because I was curious.
Yeah.
66-year-old Christina Siders, 36-year-old Gary Siders II, and 33-year-old Elizabeth Siders. And investigators say the children, again, just living in beyond horrific conditions. 7 of them even had to be hospitalized, with 2 flown to trauma centers.
Because I'm telling you, in what I've seen up to this point, I think if they would have waited another 24 hours, there was a very high probability that we'd be dealing with a death or multiple deaths of these children.
Most of our livestock was kept in better conditions than the children. It was extremely high presence, I'm sure, of bacterial and human feces. It was just a disgusting scene.
So what investigators say makes the investigation so difficult is some of the children, they can barely even speak.
That's why there's kind of contributes to a lack of information. It's one of the investigative challenges we have to face is that they are limited. They can communicate, but it's extremely limited, and some not at all.
Some of these children could even speak. Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking, this is very, it was terrible. I mean, they really.
When you said some of them can't speak, do you think maybe they just didn't speak because they were scared?
That could be the case. I mean, that's what the lawyer's saying, but what the lawyer's saying is in such stark contrast to what the police are saying. You know? And I know that the police like to exaggerate things, or they like to, overcharge people and stuff. Prosecutors do. And I have issues with all that. But this would be so egregious. They literally just said these kids can't communicate. And then the lawyers, like, they had cell phones and some of them were on social media. So, like, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
They looked.
You know what, though? When she was talking to the lawyer earlier, I don't know if you noticed this, he didn't answer the question about what she was doing for food for them. He totally avoided that question.
It looked like almost feral animals. It was terrible. So when we're talking reading and writing and education, we're talking a whole nother level of expectations here. Like it's hard enough just to get these kids to be able to. The 18-year-old can't spell her name.
One of the big questions that I have, that I think a lot of people have who have been following the story, is how did this go undiscovered for so long? With so many people living in one small house of filth, how did no one know? Well, the children were not enrolled in school, and it seems that people didn't know the extent of how bad it was.
I don't know how I could barely walk behind them in the store and be able to breathe. And not being mean, my husband would always kind of, shrug me like, you don't judge people just off of how they smell or how they look or what they're wearing, because you never know. Kind of can't believe that they were all living in something that was that bad.
It's just shocking. 16 kids in that kind of condition. This is going to last a long time being shocked. It's not going to go away in a year. It's not going to go away in a couple of years. It's going to be long lasting. That's the truth.
This case brings up another strikingly disturbing case, and there's so many similarities to the Turpin case. And I'm going to talk to the prosecutor of that case in a minute, who can share what these children in Ohio are facing with their recovery. In the Turpin case, this was from back in 2018, 13 siblings were rescued from horrific conditions. This was in Paris, California. The abusers were their parents, David and Louise Turpin. The discovery was made after 17-year-old Jordan Turpin escaped from the house, called 911. It's an unbelievable story. Jordan and her siblings were subject to starvation, to dehydration.
Meanwhile, Jordan Turpin is amazing, and she's really smart. Like, that's how she was able to escape being isolated the way she was. She was so smart to figure out how to work a phone on her own, things like that.
And violence. Several of the kids were found chained to their beds. And the parents ended up pleading guilty in that case to torture, child endangerment, and false imprisonment. They were sentenced to life in prison. And tragically, the kids were subject to even more abuse when they were put into the foster care system. And that's what I'm thinking about with this Ohio case. And there's someone who knows the Turpin case better than literally pretty much anyone. It's attorney Kim DeGonia, who prosecuted the case.
Kim, it's nice to see you. Thank you for joining me. I wanted to talk to you because the minute I heard about this Ohio story, the Turpin case obviously popped into my head, and you really know more. I mean, you prosecuted that case. You know more about this sort of thing than anyone else I can think of. And there just seems to be a lot of similarities here. And the first thing I thought with this Ohio case, which also relates to Turpin, is like, how did no one know 16 kids in this house? How are we just now hearing about this? How did they just now find them?
Well, hey, Brian, it's nice to see you again. Thanks for having me. I mean, that was the exact question we had with the Turpin kids too. And what I think it comes down to is just, people's lives are so busy. You go to work, you come home from work, you get your kids, you go to soccer, you go to gymnastics, you do all the things, and you're busy with your own life, and you're not really noticing who your neighbor is. And you're not really noticing, like, oh, that's weird, my neighbor never comes out. We're just so detached, it seems, from one another. And so I think it's very easy for these.
I would totally notice. I think, like, I noticed, I said something about one neighbor that never comes out the other day to you. Do you remember that? Are you muted and not listening to me?
I was muted. Sorry. I'm trying to manage my mic better. I apologize. No, I was saying that I would be completely oblivious. I wouldn't notice at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would. I don't know if I'd report it, but
that's the other side too. It's like, what are you
I
gonna
probably would.
Yeah, you probably
kids to slide under the radar. Obviously, it was very easy for the Turpin kids too. And the other thing was they weren't attending public school. They had never been registered in the local public school or the school district. And so really the local Board of Education, local school districts did not know that these kids even existed in their community or that they were potential students that should be attending. Now with the Turpin case, as you know, there was that oversight with the Board of, not the Board of Education, excuse me, the state, who Luis and David Turpin had been applying for their homeschool license and had somebody come out earlier from the state to check to make sure it was a legitimate homeschool program. Then maybe they would have been found sooner, but that begs the question, like, how do they just fly under the radar? Nobody sees them or knows them or even knows they exist for decades. It's so sad.
With the Turpins, were there ever neighbors who called in anything or noticed anything strange?
Yeah, so there was neighbors in Texas that noticed, kind of right when all of it began and Luis started acting very strange and taking the kids out of school. There was an opportunity for the local school district there. And there was a neighbor in Texas, actually. There was also a pastor when Jennifer ran away that had contact and realized something weird was going on, but they chose to take the kids right back to David and Luis. When they moved into that Marietta house, there were a couple neighbors that came forward and said that they noticed weird things, like only certain kids would come out, but they would see other kids, like silhouettes marching upstairs, that they knew there were more children in that house. But again, nobody acted or did anything.
So I keep hearing from my friends about how much they love Factor, and I'm just like,
Oh,
"Look,
here we
guys,
go.
The food is so good,
There's
and I
your
appreciate
Factor
Factor.
Factor
Kids are
meals.
18, 16, 15, 14, 13, 11, 10, 8, 6, 5, 4-year-old twins, 2-year-old twins, and 1.5-year-old twins. So they had 3 sets of twins, but no one really knows for sure. Like, and I hate to say this, but like we don't seem to know for sure that those are all the mom and the dad's kids. Like, it seems like a lot of kids for just them,
Right. And very close in age. It does beg the question, is there going to be some type of DNA done or some type of further investigation to figure out, are they all mom and dads?
Yeah.
It's a valid question. With the Turpins, we were pretty confident that all 13 children did belong to David and Luis, as far as that is concerned.
Just mentally, psychologically, like, what is going on with these parents? I mean, this is a really big question, I know, but those are your own kids. It's your own blood. How does it get to this point where they're living in filth? They're chained up with the Turpins. Similar situations, they were living in a 12-by-12 room in Ohio. Like, how do people get to a place where they're doing this to their own kids?
I mean, Brian, that is the $1 million question. How do they? I don't know. It's so callous and it's so, there's no words to describe, right? How a mother and a father who bear these children can turn and put them into the conditions, or even themselves live in those conditions, where it's so filthy and there's rats and there's feces. Nobody in their right mind would want to live in that. So it begs the question, what is going on with these parents and why? What is their motive for wanting to produce all these children and then just treat them in this manner? I think there's got to be some mental health things going on, some control issues. I know that David and Luis, at some point, they tried to point fingers. At some point, they tried to blame it on past traumas. All of the kids typically, though, had the same story, that it was a gradual demise. It wasn't always so bad, that Luis started out little by little. And it's almost like with each chaining of one child, then it became easier to chain them for longer. And then with each forcing a child to skip a meal, it became easier to make all of them skip a meal. And then with chaining one, it became easier to chain 2. And then they just kind of got used to this rhythm of adding horrific things. And to the point where they were at where they're chained and they're in cages and they're living in deplorable conditions. I don't know, though, the answer to that question of how a parent gets to that point. It's horrible.
Was it a religious thing with the Turpins at first?
There was some evidence of that yes, it was this multi-different religions that they had kind of meshed into one. Some things from Buddhism, some things from Christianity, some things from atheism. It was a very strange how they spoke about the religion, but nonetheless, there was this love for God within all of the children when we met them. And even I think till to this day, a lot of them really have a deep faith, but I don't think that it was the religion that they had created that sent them down this road to live in these conditions. And with David and Luis, it was interesting. When it got so bad for them in Texas, they actually went and lived in a hotel and let the kids stay in those horrible conditions. So, it's unexplainable.
Do they claim to love their kids?
They went and stayed in a hotel and made their kids stay. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
How do you even explain that?
Probably you would analogize it to the domestic violence, right? Where a partner beats up their other partner in a horrible way, but still claims it's in the name of love. And it was just a overreaction, or all of the excuses that they use, but they call that love as well, which is equally disturbing.
With the Ohio case, I was watching the sheriff. He was explaining that some of the kids can't even really speak. Like, even the older kids don't have like language skills. The 18-year-old, he said, couldn't write her name. Like with the Turpins, how difficult was it to communicate with them initially?
Brian, that was almost an identical thing that we struggled with the Turpins. And in fact, I think when Diane Sawyer had the 911 call come out and you saw Jordan Turpin trying to explain to the detective what the chain, like the bruises on the wrist were, she kept calling them the places. She didn't know the grammatical word to use. My brother is chained up and he has bruises on him. She kept calling it the places. And you can see the deputy is like, I don't know what she's talking about. He was thinking about calling in a 5150 hold. Same with the medications. She couldn't read or say the word medication. She couldn't say her street name. And there was this cadence about all of those children that was very present when we first rescued them. You could hear that there was a different cadence, almost like their own language that you could visibly hear when you spoke to them. And I believe it's the same with these Ohio kids because, when you're not exposed to the outside world and you're not exposed to individuals who have accents, individuals who have English as their second language, we pick up a lot of those social skills and how we speak to one another. And when you don't have any of that because you are completely isolated, it shows a very similar pattern in their language and how they speak. Similar with the Turpin kids, they weren't going to school. They weren't being homeschooled by Luis, so they didn't know how to write their names. Those poor kids were rescued and got thrown into the foster care system and had to go to elementary school at the age that they were. So they got thrown into 4th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, yet they had never been to school. They don't know 4th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade work. And I would imagine the Ohio children are in the exact same boat.
Is it complicated for them, like with the Turpins, and I'm thinking of these Ohio kids, emotionally, like, even though you've been abused so badly, that's the only life you've ever known, and suddenly you're pulled out of that? Like, I even think about, I've heard from people who were like in prison for a long time, like in a way they miss prison because of the routine and that's all they knew for like 40, 50 years. You know what I mean? Is it a similar thing?
Yes. There was some of the children of those 13 in the Turpin case that, they appreciated their freedom, but there was definitely some who had that very sentiment where they just wanted to go back to what was familiar. And the other thing that was hard, and I'm sure it's the same way in Ohio with Child Protective Services, if you're over the age of 18, even though you have the mentality and the education level of maybe a 7-year-old, they can't go into foster care. They've aged out of the system. So all of the children over the age of 18 will have to go into Adult Protective Services, and the children will have to go through Child Protective Services, which means all 16 of them will be split up. And I think that was particularly, even to this moment in time, the most difficult things the Turpin kids have had to deal with is all of the siblings. They only had each other. They were each other's friends. They were each other's confidence. Jordan would do her YouTube videos and her other sister would be her lookout for her. And that was all she had when she was in that home with David and Luis. And when they were rescued, all of that was taken away. They got split up. And that was a very, very difficult thing for them to deal with. And I hope the Ohio kids don't have to deal with that, because having each other, I think, probably would be easier, but the realities of the system is they're likely split up, which is an added emotional pressure that they're going to have to deal with living in society that they've never lived in and dealing with social norms that they've never dealt with before for years.
How does it make any sense to split them up? I mean, it just seems like with everything that they've been through, like with the Turpins, did they not consider at least keeping them together, or maybe keeping half of them together or something like that?
I think they did try to keep a few of them together, and at times a few of them were together. But as far as the adults, all of the children that were over the age of 18 had to be put in Adult Protective Services, and the children that were under the age of 18 had to be put in foster homes. So there was no way to have all of them combined because of the age group and because of the different agencies that were responsible for them. So, and it's difficult to find a foster home that wants to take in 13 people or 16 kids in the Ohio case. That's a lot to ask of a foster family who also has no training whatsoever in this specific type of trauma, right? How often do we hear about dozens of children being chained up together, not fed? We don't hear about that very often. And so therefore most foster parents aren't going to know how to deal with that situation, sadly. So you can't really throw 13 or 16 of them into one home just because of logistics and because of training and the trauma and all of the things that go with it. But it's the most difficult on the kids.
Yeah, so with the Ohio case, there were 2 that had to be airlifted even. That's how serious the injuries were. 7 went to the hospital, 2 had to be airlifted. They won't give specifics on like what the injuries are, but what comes to mind? I mean, I know they were living in filth.
Oh, I mean, they're probably emaciated. They probably don't have enough enough food in their system to keep them alive. We had that issue and that concern with 1 or 2 of the Turpin kids, that there was a very serious moment in time where the doctors at Corona Regional didn't know or had said if they would have lived in these conditions even 48 hours to 72 hours longer, there's a good chance they would have died from starvation, essentially.
Dang.
And I would imagine that's probably the same thing that's happening there.
With the Turpins, once they got into the system, you mentioned like foster care, there was more abuse.
Yes. And it wasn't just the abuse of their foster family. It was the mental and the emotional abuse that also came with it. Because you got to remember, Brian, most of us would not know what to do with a child who had been eating only a peanut butter sandwich every single day, right? You would take that child into your home and you would think, I want to cook them a feast every single night and I want to make them eat dinner and eat lunch and breakfast and pancakes. But for a child who's only been eating a peanut butter sandwich for the last decade of their life, there's a very specific way in which you must reintroduce food. And those children don't know about how to chew meat. It's almost like teaching an infant how to eat all over again. And so then you have foster families getting frustrated because they don't have training in how to feed these children, and the children are getting sick because they're actually eating and they're not being introduced to food properly. So you have the struggle that the children already have with food that's been created because they've been deprived of it for so long, mentally and emotionally, but physically. Their little bodies are just unable to process the food because their bodies have not been taught to do that. Then you have the emotional that they're trying to overcome, right? Their parents are now in jail. They're split up from their siblings. And then you're thrown into a foster family where they're abusive, physically, verbally. Their international things are much different.
All right. We don't have to watch the whole thing. It's interesting that he's starting to cover this story. What do you think about this?
It's interesting. I think I don't trust the lawyer. I think these kids are probably way worse off. And I think maybe the mom is sugarcoating it to the lawyer because like what they had said about the Turpin kids, where it was like it was a gradual thing, and it just happened in a way that was not obvious to the people involved. But yeah, that's what I think. I think those kids are gonna need a lot of help.
So I have